pretty simple to do, and as I say,
Scholar Richard Reeves believes the United States is in need of some self-reflection about income inequality.
I think America doesn't want to have a conversation about class, is uncomfortable with it.
Reeves is a co-director of the Brookings Institution's Center on Children and Families. His new book, Dream Hoarders, argues that while the top 1% of America's wealthy receive so much attention, the more significant divide is between the top 20% and everyone else, struggling to achieve the American dream. Reeves suggests the advantages of those at the top are gained simply by being part of the right socioeconomic group. By supporting certain policies and behaviors, they protect their status and keep others out.
A dream hoarder is someone that's a member of the American upper middle class, so on the top rung in terms of income ladder, but is then using that position to rig certain systems or certain markets so that they succeed and that their kids succeed. So rig the housing market, rig the education market, to some extent rig the labor market. And so it's basically a bit like a cartel in business, if you like, is where you're using your power in an anti-competitive way rather than in a competitive way.
We all want to think of ourselves as middle class, but we're not.
I think 9 in 10 Americans define themselves as middle class of one form or another. And it's obviously an attractive thing to say we're all the same class, we're all in the same boat. You're stretching the definition of middle now to include people with very healthy six-figure incomes right at the top of the distribution. And at some point the word middle ceases to mean very much.
Reeves defines the upper middle class as families making $117,000 or more a year. To illustrate the difference between them and everyone else, Reeves points to this statistic. Between 1979 and 2013, the total pre-tax income for the bottom 80% of Americans grew by $3 trillion. The much smaller group that makes up the top 20%, their income grew by $4 trillion, $1 trillion more. Reeves says the upper middle class income gains mean a greater benefit from the government's home mortgage interest tax deduction and more power to insulate themselves in better schools and neighborhoods.
If you're in the upper middle class, you get to buy an expensive house, more expensive than most people can afford. You then get a deduction from the Treasury for doing that, so you're helped by the government to buy this expensive house. You can then use local zoning ordinances or land use regulations to ensure that only people like you can live in your neighborhood. And then you can organize your school admissions policies based on neighborhoods, which means that even public schools can actually be predominantly affluent and high quality because of the way we've organized it.
Reeves calculates almost 40% of the upper middle class live near public schools with the best test scores, according to the data from the U.S. Census Bureau and the nonprofit Great Schools.
It's like an X-ray that exposes the class fracture when schools get involved and when you think about kind of integration.
Take this elementary school in New York City's affluent Brooklyn Heights neighborhood. PS8 is predominantly white with test scores considerably above average. When the city's education department rezoned the area 2 years ago to ease overcrowding in PS8 and assign children to nearby PS307, some PS8 parents rebelled. PS307 had served predominantly low-income minority students with lower test scores.
It's not that anyone sat down and said, look, with some devilish scheme, let's find a way to rig the system and design tax and education and housing in this way. But it is the result of the interaction of those different kinds of systems, which many of us benefit from, and candidly we'll support those sorts of exclusionary mechanisms because it's in our short-term, immediate self-interest to do that.
In the end, the Brooklyn Heights school rezoning went through, but Reeves says the class gap in education continues right on through college.
You also talk a little bit about the idea of legacies and giving you a leg up if your parents went to the same college. How does that play out? Because most of the Ivy League schools says, no, we don't really do that. Not to a great extent anyway.
There's something deeply troubling about the idea that my kid should get preferential treatment getting into a particular college because I happen to go there or my wife did, whereas the kid of an immigrant by definition can't benefit from that, or a kid who was born poor, first in their generation to go to college. So there's something symbolically deeply unfair about that system.
Besides that idea, a slightly more public example might be internships and who gets them and how diverse that actually is.
One survey suggested that 3 in 5 graduating college seniors have done some sort of internship. Many employers will give a job to someone who's done an internship. They'll certainly value someone who's done it. So it's become quite an important transition institution in the last 20 years. And what you find is that, first of all, many of them are unpaid, which means almost by definition that they're biased in favor of those who are from affluent backgrounds. But also, and even more egregiously in some ways, they're very often handed out on the basis of who you know or as a favour. Well, that's just cheating in terms of an open labour market and the kind of social norm we need to shift.
Some critics of Reeves's work argue that laying the blame for lack of upward mobility on the upper middle class is misguided. In a recent Washington Post op-ed, economist Robert Samuelson wrote, "Though economic opportunities abound, the capacity to take advantage of them does not. That, not hoarding, is our real problem. As for parents, why make them feel guilty for wanting to help their children? What are parents for, after all? Let's not blame the struggle of the lower middle class and poor on the success of the upper middle class. The two are only loosely connected, if at all." But Reeves says being a successful parent shouldn't mean rigging the playing field.
The question then is, where's the line? When does sort of good parenting become some form of hoarding or kind of cheating? Because we're also in favour of a fair society. How do we manage schools? How do we vote on a local zoning bill? Do we play the legacy card and a donation card? How do we operate in our own institutions? It's not quite good enough just to say, well, everyone's doing it. Because that's the moral reasoning of a sixth grader. If my kid comes home and says, I cheated in math today, but everyone was cheating, do I say, oh, that's okay. As long as everyone's cheating, it's fine. At some point, we have to do better than that, I think.
One of the controversial things you point out is that for someone to move up, another person might have to move down. Yeah. And that runs counter to everything we've ever grown up with. Oh, there's plenty of room at the top, we can all get there.
Yeah. It is a zero-sum game. You know, the top 20% can only ever contain a fifth of the population. That's just a math statement. And so, to that extent, if you want more people moving into that top 20%, you do need some more people coming out of it, falling down. But downward mobility, whilst mathematically necessary, is also deeply unpopular, both at a personal and a political level. I think that's true for all of us. You know, very few of us are willing to decide which of our kids are going to be nominated to go down in order to create more room for poor kids to rise up. But it is a necessary part of the story.